Lesson 128, problem solving. So for today's lesson, you're going to be working with word problems, but once again, we're going to be working with percents. So you'll come across questions that look like the example I have here at the top. Polly would like to purchase a new SUV. In order to do so, she must pay a deposit of $3,000, which is 5% of the total cost. What is the price of the SUV? So she has to pay a little bit of money up front at the beginning. It's 5% of the total cost. We have to figure out what is the total price of the SUV. And to do that, we are going to use our handy dandy equation that we have been using. Percent times whole equals part. All right, so all you have to do when you come across questions like this is take your equation and fill in what you know. Now, we know that she had to pay 5% of the total cost. So we know the percent is 5%, but we have to put it into its decimal form. So the decimal form would be 0.05 for the percent. What we don't know is what the whole SUV cost. So we're going to represent that with a letter. Let's use a letter W for whole. And we know that 5% of that total cost, or that whole cost, is 3,000. Okay, so it's looking just like what we did in a previous lesson, but this time, instead of the percent being what is missing, we are missing the whole. All right, so we have one missing variable, and we're actually going to use the same steps that you used yesterday to figure out what the whole is. We're using algebra again, so think to yourself, what is happening to that W? It's being multiplied by 0.05. So in order to get that by itself, we take our 0.05 times W and we divide it by 0.05. And then in order for the equal sign to be true, what we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. So we end up with an equation that looks like that. All right, so we know that W then is equal to 3,000 divided by 0.05. Now, we have to use our long division to find that. So we take our 3,000, we divide it by 0.05. Now, what you have to remember about dividing by decimals is that there's a trick to make your life easier. It's really hard to think to yourself, how many times does 0.05 fit into 3? All right, you could do it, but there's a much simpler way to do this. All you have to do is bump the decimal out of the way. So this actually becomes a 5. You can think of it like a 5. But then in order for the long division to work, you have to take the imaginary decimal that we never usually bother putting there, but we know is there, and bump it this way too, and then fill the empty spaces with zeros. So now, instead of thinking how many times does 0.05 fit into 3, we can think how many times does 5 fit into 3, and it actually doesn't, so you move on to 30. So much easier to do. How many times does 5 fit into 30? 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. End up with a remainder of 0. And then we start the work of bringing down all these zeros. Now, I'm not going to show you because what's going to end up happening is we just have all zeros up there because all of these numbers over here are zeros, and we're not going to end up with anything other than a 0. So we get to the answer of 60,000. So 3,000 divided by 0.05 is 60,000. So our total cost for the vehicle is $60,000. So when you get to your final answer, you can give a little sentence answer. So the price is $60,000. And you have figured out what the price of that vehicle is using our equation percent times whole equals part. All right, so every single one of your questions today, you're going to be using that equation. Sometimes the percent will be missing. Sometimes the whole will be missing. And sometimes the part will be missing. So one of those options is going to be missing. And what's going to be tricky today, because we're not really learning any new math, we already learned how to do those algebra steps. What's going to be tricky is figuring out which one is missing. So just read through your questions really, really carefully. Think about, what is the missing amount? Am I missing the total number? Am I missing the percent? Or am I missing the part? And then all you have to remember is that if you're missing either the percent or the whole, you use algebra. And if you're missing the part, we did that, I think, on Monday, where we found the percent of a number. All you have to do is just multiply. Right, you can just take your decimal form of your percent and multiply it by the whole number, and you come up with the part. All right, so keep those things in mind. And then as you do today's lesson, make sure that for each of the questions, you are, number one, writing out an equation. So making sure that you use the percent times whole equals part. Make sure it starts out like this. Then what you do is you solve the equation. So show me all of your steps. And then you give me a final sentence answer. Okay, so write an equation, solve it showing all your work, and then give me a quick sentence answer as your final answer. And I'll make sure that my answer key shows all of those steps as well. So if you went wrong somewhere, you can figure out where you did it. So that's it. Not a whole lot of new math, just using some of the stuff that we've learned in the past few days. If you have any questions, let me know.